Greetings, scholars, and welcome to Following the Gong, a podcast of the Schreyer Honors College at Penn State. Following the Gong takes you inside conversations with our scholar alumni to hear their stories so you can gain career and life advice and expand your professional network. You can hear the true breadth of how scholar alumni have gone on to shape the world after they rang the gong and graduated with honors, and learn from their experiences so you can use their insights in your own journey. This show is proudly sponsored by the Scholar Alumni Society, a constituent group of the Penn State Alumni Association. I'm your host, Sean Goheen, class of 2011 and college staff member. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. If you're a regular listener, welcome back. Jim Durrell, class of 1994, is a senior engineer at Google in Pittsburgh, working on the AdBrain machine learning infrastructure. Before joining Google, Jim was CTO at Health Monitoring Systems, doing public health reporting, and VP at McKesson, building automated pharmacies. He earned a BS in computer science with honors from the College of Engineering in 1994, and earned his MBA from the Smeal College of Business in 2005. He's happy to talk about technology or just about anything else, and you can find him on LionLink. Jim shares his story and insights for all scholars, including the value of engaging classmates and friends as resources to inform your major and career choices, finding non-major related clubs and the opportunities those can present, solving real-life problems for real-world experience, Byzantine problems in computer science, how job searching has changed since the 1990s and how it hasn't, the differences between frontline and entry-level roles from leadership roles in tech companies, adjusting to your first management role and then senior leadership roles, the value of getting an MBA, particularly from the Smeal College of Business, what it's like elevating to the C-suite, the overlap of managers and mentors and how to identify and approach mentors. He also talks creative solutions for complex problems and what machine learning is, and he also shares what it's like working at Google, finding red flags and green flags during the interview process, and thoughts on being not only a scholar alum, but a parent of a Schreyer scholar. He wraps up with the importance of recognizing and honoring your support system and ideas for approaching professional development in internships and after graduation. Now, we'll dive into our conversation with Jim, following the gong. Jim, thank you so much for joining us here today on Following the Gong. I want to start at the very beginning with you and find out what inspired you to come to Penn State and to what was then the University Scholars Program, now the Schreyer Honors College, to study computer science. Was that always a passion for you, or did you develop that after getting to Penn State?
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me. It's really exciting to be with you. As for how I found Penn State, I grew up my family moved to central Pennsylvania when I was little, and so we had no ties to Penn State. And if you're not tied to Penn State, you don't have anything against it, but man, you wish Penn Staters should be quiet. Like they talk a lot about it. But I was 16 and picking schools, and my dad told me, he said, go to Penn State. He said, you're too young to lock in what you want to do for your life. And no matter what you choose, Penn State's going to have a good program in it. Go to Penn State. And it made a ton of sense. And so that's how I ended up at Penn State. Literally within 2 hours of being on campus, I was at the freshman pep rally yelling, "We want the Lion," and I've been a diehard ever since.
I think that's really solid advice from your dad. There's very few things that we don't have here and don't excel at Penn State. So really spot on. So how was it that you came to find computer science then?
So I was always into computers. I always had computers I was working on, did projects and programming competitions in high school. But honestly, I went to Penn State for a business major. It didn't really occur to me I could major in computer science. This is back in the dark ages, before the internet and before the dot-com bubble. And it wasn't obvious that CS was such a lucrative career. But I took the CS classes. I enjoyed those the most. I was excited. I found myself, that's the internships I was applying for. And I learned what some of the salaries my classmates were getting offered. And I realized, no, this could actually work really well. And so I switched to computer science and said, if it's what I was excited about and it pays well, then it's a great choice.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful that were able to get that information from your classmates. Now, I'm curious, pre-internet, going a little off to the side here, how did you actually find that out from them? Did they come back to campus and talk to you, or walk us through that process? I'm curious what that was like in the early 90s.
Sure. Well, my one buddy got an internship at IBM, and it was through talking to him and referrals that I got my internship at IBM. But he had gotten that and told me what they were paying. And it was an order of magnitude more than what I earned at my summer job. And that was very notable. But then I also heard you started asking around other students in the class, and that's a frequent topic of conversation, obviously, how people are doing on job searches and what they're finding. So I picked it up that way.
So regardless of the level of technological infrastructure at the time, what I'm hearing is networking is critically important no matter the era.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, in the pre-questionnaire, you also shared that you were involved in some really cool things on campus that had absolutely nothing to do with computer science, which is obviously the hallmark of a scholar with a broad range of experiences. Can you tell us about those activities that you participated in outside of STEM?
I was always involved heavily in music. And actually, I think there was a whole group of us that were computer science majors and scholars, and did a whole bunch of things in either thespians, or several of us were also in the Phi Mi Alpha music fraternity that we were very heavily involved in. So I met my wife in a thespians production, and Phi Mi Alpha, I was in the Dreamers, an a cappella group that sang on campus, and I understand is still singing on campus, doing Singing Valentines every year. But I got to sing for serenade Joe Paterno. I got to serenade George Bush when he came to campus. I even got and combining them, I got a scholar's independent study credit for building a scheduling system that let us record all the different Dreamers, who knew which parts, what times they were available for singing Valentine, so we knew which songs we could or couldn't sell at a certain time.
That's incredible. I mean, that probably really helped your group take off. And also kudos to you for leveraging that for some academic credit, because I imagine that was probably a pretty complex bit of coding in the early 90s.
Actually, it ended up being more educational than I expected. I thought it was going to be a quick scheduling program. It turns out this is a provably computationally hard problem that computer scientists call bin packing, and there really isn't a super efficient way to do it. Now,
was this anything that led into your thesis work, or did you tackle a different computer science problem in that space?
No, my thesis was the title was Byzantine Agreement and Expected Constant Rounds of Communication. So like every good thesis, it has scary sounding words or confusing titles. But no, it's pretty much unrelated. So that thesis, in any distributed system, things eventually get out of sync. Somebody fails, their timing gets off, something like that. And if when that happened, everything stopped, it would be fine. We could tell systems had stopped and we could just restart them from some well-known starting point and everything's fine. But that's not what happens. Systems just start to fail in weird ways. And we call those Byzantine failures. And my thesis was building a distributed voting algorithm so that all well-behaving players could reach consensus despite misbehaving or even malicious actors in the vote.
I'm going to pretend that I understood anything that you just said and nod. But for the coders, for the computer science folks listening, I'm sure you understood what was just said and know that sounds really important.
Probably a lot of them might realize that Bitcoin and its mining process depends on that kind of distributed consensus algorithm. And I wish I had known that then.
That I do understand. So I think that helps translate that for those of us to use a layperson's terms. Obviously, that was probably towards your senior year. And senior year, you are also working on job searching. Now, going back, you talked about talking with buddies, with classmates about the opportunities that they had at IBM and other companies. But you're also in a lot of leadership positions, and I don't want to jump the gun on that. But I would be curious, what has changed in the job searching process from what you went through to what your children are going through or about to go through, the peers of our current scholars?
There's some obvious changes. Software that does resume screening, and no one understands how it works. Please don't ask me to explain it. Video interviews are common. Students having easy access to companies all around the country, all around the world, have ways of recruiting that we never saw at the time. Things that haven't changed, though, you mentioned it earlier, still depends on the networking. It still depends a lot on who you know, who refers you. And partly that's practical for your benefit. You want to go to a place where you have confidence in it, someone you trust is there and you want to work with them and they're telling you good things about it. But it also helps the company a lot that those internal referrals matter a lot, and they are how you get through HR faster. HR has more confidence because a trusted internal employee is saying that this is someone they want to work with again and it's worth hiring. So networking is still critical.
So I read through your LinkedIn profile in preparation for our conversation today, and I noticed that you ascended into a lot of leadership roles really early in your career. So what did you learn from those experiences? And I think importantly for our scholars who are looking for their entry-level roles for their internships, how was that different from being a technical frontline staff member, or in many cases, probably a coder?
So what did I learn? Probably the first thing I learned was I wasn't quite ready for some of those roles. Maybe ambitious and took them on a little early. Moving up that ladder, there's a few different shifts in perspective. And the first level of management, what a lot of people struggle with is losing that concrete list of here's what I did. Here's the code I wrote or the sales that I made. Here's what I did. And I can point to it and say, that's my success. A lot of people struggle with that. You have to learn to find fulfillment through what your team is doing. I was actually okay with that. A lot of people told me to expect it. So I had good mentors that told me to expect that. And so I was mentally ready for it. Where I struggled was when things went off the rails. My personal solution was always coding heroics. I could find ways to make it work, find ways to get the job done. And that doesn't work at scale. So the shift there, it's better planning, better contingencies, better tracking. So you knew when to invoke contingencies and drop certain items. It was definitely a different shift there. The next level up, when you become a manager of managers, it's a different set shift. At a first line management, you track people very closely and you talk to them, you know what they're doing, and you kind of monitor it on almost a daily basis, at least have a sense of it. Manager of managers, it's a lot more fire and forget, a lot more delegation. You're working with other managers, right? They know what they're doing, and you can't scale if you micromanage them and try and supervise them too closely. So you manage a lot more through metrics. You manage almost exclusively through delegation. You still have a mentoring role, you still have a development role with your direct reports, but you're trusting them to do the hands-on work of that delivering the product. And then the highest levels, you get into more strategic thinking, market positioning, product differentiation, and then ultimately valuation and exit strategies, depending on what kind of company you're in.
Now, you said that you may have gone into these a little bit too early, but you also took some steps to help you learn these skills by coming back to Penn State for an MBA. Can you tell us what that experience was like, especially coming from the technical background that you had?
Yeah. So, I think they complement each other wonderfully. I was surprised. The foundational knowledge I got from the MBA really rounded out my understanding. I'd already managed teams at that point. There were things I learned by observation, by osmosis, by mentoring. But the MBA really gave that foundation for people management. It also readied me for conversations around strategy, cash flow, valuation, like we were talking about. Those are things that, in retrospect, I think I might have jumped into, not recognizing how poorly I understood them. Looking back, at the time, I remember recognizing that there were people I worked with who were senior that were having those conversations. And I realized a lot of it was flying by the seat of their pants. There was good structures and good ways of recognizing and doing things that I think people underestimated that the value of that formal education and structure.
So since graduating from Smeal with your MBA, you've had some titles like vice president and chief technology officer. What is it really like being on that C-suite? Were there things that you enjoyed? What are the things that you maybe wished that you could be doing but weren't able to do?
Sales strikes me right away. When you get to that level, you're always getting pulled into either new customers or customer retention, because there's always issues and escalations. As CTO, you have more responsibility for maybe being a little further ahead of the curve in terms of what are the product differentiators that we're doing for this new market, and therefore what do we need to build? What enabling technology needs to be out there and ready for us? So it's looking definitely a much further horizon is what you're looking at on that regard. Like I said, the shift to managing through delegation, you're not hands-on, you're trusting teams to say, I need a software architecture and need something to address this problem. Go write me one, and please bring it back in 3 weeks, and like trusting teams to do that. And maybe you think you could have done it by yourself, or maybe you couldn't have. You need to let go of that, because otherwise you just cannot scale and you can't get it all done. And you're going to end up hurting your team and slowing performance.
So other than maybe considering an MBA, what are some things that scholars could be doing right now to prepare for both those early technical roles and those senior leadership roles down the road?
Grab the right mentor, work with the right person, find managers that you respect, that are really good at their jobs, and that are willing to invest in you. I have had a couple managers that have really stood out to me over the years, where I learned different techniques of breaking down problems, of analyzing things, sanity checking work that I apply every day. And their judgment, their steady, calm demeanor, and how they approach problems really influenced me. You learn a lot by watching them and learning how they do things, and then taking and listening to their advice. Or get an MBA, because you got to push the Penn State degree.
Absolutely. And shameless plug for the World Campus Smeal College of Business partnership through the online MBA that I'm in right now. So highly recommend checking that out after you graduate. So shameless plug there. But you mentioned mentors. So I want to take another detour here and ask, you mentioned kind of the calm and steady presence, but are there other indicators of folks that could be good mentors? And more importantly, how do you approach those conversations? Do you outright ask, will you be my mentor, or do these things develop organically for you?
Sometimes they're formal. Sometimes it is your manager, the person hiring you. I mean, very explicitly, I've had managers hire me with the stated intent of, I want you to be my successor. I want to groom you for this. That happens. That's very clear. If not, I think what more often happens is you go to someone you respect and you've heard, maybe you haven't seen them in those strategy conversations because you're not in them yourself yet, but you hear people talk about them. You see the respect they get from other managers, and you go to them and say, I want to learn about this, or I want to achieve this kind of role or explore this kind of role. Can you help me? Or what advice can you give me? I don't think it starts out as saying, will you be my mentor? That's probably not quite as explicit. You develop that relationship and eventually you just realize that they are. But the key thing there, though, is you've gone to them and said, I want help to do something. Going to somebody and generically saying, will you be my mentor, is it's so hard for that person, right? They don't know what you want to do. They don't know what you're struggling with, what you already feel you're good at. You need to give them some structure. Here's what I want to accomplish out of this. And then they can do a lot more for you.
That's great insight, being very clear on what you're actually hoping to learn and get out from them. If that is strategy, if it is coding, if it is something in another industry entirely, as the mentor, if your mentee does not know what they want, so scholars listening, figure out what you want. And maybe that is what you're trying to figure out, is what you do want. But that is something in and of itself. Now, I want to steer the conversation in a bit of a different direction. We've talked a lot about big picture and philosophical mentoring, but you've had a really stellar career working in software development and different things in this space. I'd love to hear about some of the technical accomplishments that you've either directly contributed to or have helped lead in your leadership roles. So this is your opportunity to just geek out a little bit on the coding and technical side of your story to date.
Sure. Well, right out of school, I was lucky to land at a company called Transarc. And before the dot-com bubble, this was attracting some really top talent. We were doing distributed systems, and I got to learn from some incredible people that have gone on to build their own companies and be very successful. But for a formative experience right out of school, I look back on it, and I'm just still a little bit shocked at how lucky I got, just how fortunate that worked. Networking through Penn Staters, through Penn State professors is how I found it. But that was a great formation. A couple of things that stand out. I was at a startup in California in early 2000s, getting into mobile apps when mobile was first coming out. And this is pre-iPhone, pre-Android. So remember, the ecosystem we take for granted didn't really exist. But we had an application. We won awards for it, but still had no way to monetize it. You had to give half of it or 70% of it to the mobile carriers. Otherwise, they wouldn't install it. So we came up with a way to monetize it through advertising. And again, remember, data on your phone wasn't a thing yet. So the advertising had to be built in, had to be automated. We built a whole advertising network. We built a way of selling ads. Then how do you get it on the phones? So we built sideloading techniques to get it onto the phone. We built a game distribution network to put it on a whole bunch of different websites. There was a ton of stuff there that we now take for granted. That was pretty interesting and exciting. Now, on a daily basis, I work for Google, and I work on the AdBrain platform. It's a phenomenally successful machine learning environment. It's probably one of, if not the largest production neural net in the world, and we use it to predict which ads you're going to click on. So a very practical application of machine learning.
So for those of us lay people, can you give a little bit more insight on to what machine learning actually is? We hear this term in the news, we hear in different spaces. But if you don't know what machine learning is, can you give us a quick crash course on this concept?
No, the joke is that none of us can. Reproducibility and explainability are key problems in machine learning. No, basically, so there's lots of kinds of machine learning. I'll focus on neural nets, which is probably one of the most common. If you imagine a huge matrix with, in our case, several layers of variables that all feed into one another. You give them inputs and it multiplies through this huge matrix and it comes out with a prediction at the end. Two things that stand out is we initialize it with pseudo-random variables. And then the way we train it, and why it's called machine learning, is the machine teaches itself. We give it some known answers and it progressively refines all the coefficients in that matrix until it can reliably reproduce the known answers. And then we give it a whole bunch of unknown inputs and trust its output. So it's really that iterative process of letting the machine train itself and tune its own parameters that makes it machine learning.
I'll refrain here from making any Skynet jokes.
Yes, we do joke that we're responsible for managing it. So when it becomes self-aware, we have to take it out.
Now, you mentioned, and this is probably something that might have drawn a lot of you listening, is seeing where you currently work, which is, in fact, Google. Now, you talked about what you're working on right now, and obviously that's a huge revenue stream for a lot of the things that, as you said, we take for granted in the ecosystem of apps and internet as it currently stands. But I'd be curious, what is it actually like working at Google? I think we've seen the images and the stories of some of the new companies of the 21st century, like Google, like Facebook, like Pixar, that have these more laid back atmospheres. Is it actually like that? Give us your insight for students who may be wanting to pursue, especially considering you don't work in Silicon Valley itself.
No, I work in Pittsburgh. I work in the Google office in Pittsburgh. Although, Google New York is huge. It's not the size of Silicon Valley, but man, it's big. And it's definitely attractive to Penn State students that might be looking. In terms of culture, it is very laid back. I will say Google's culture is the best I've worked under. The policies are really built on the premise that employees are valuable and they can be trusted. So flexible hours. open-ended sick time, that you're sick, just stay home. You don't need to account for it or justify it, and it doesn't come off vacation time. You can travel to meet other teams. There's support for family needs. So at the beginning of the pandemic, I had some unexpected needs to help care for my parents. And I told my manager, and their reaction was, here's carer's leave, just take it, go. We'll take care of everything here. Put family first. That, and just trust to employees that it's not going to be abused, and that when people need that help, they really need the help, underpins the whole culture. Google has a lot of investment in community. My performance ratings actually have a community component, what we do for community. And actually a lot of the stuff I do with Penn State shows up on my Google performance review, but it's required, especially at the higher levels. The higher you go, the bigger the community requirement. It's not like something that's just given to low-level employees so that high-level employees can focus on the work. No, it's the opposite. So when when COVID hit, a friend of mine does public health reporting, owns a company doing public health reporting, and I wanted to go volunteer to help him do some things. And I checked with Google, just expecting them to say that there's no conflict of interest and you're cool to do it after hours. Instead, they offered me paid time off to go do it. And they asked if there was opportunities for others to volunteer to help. It's a totally different perspective. And then, of course, there's, the free and really good food. The food really is as good as they say. I have rooftop patios, and they have massages and all the other office perks people talk about and you see in movies. They are real. I miss them, and I'm eager to get back in the office.
So for you listening, it's clear that, Jim, you are at home right now working.
Yeah.
And hopefully this podcast also counts towards your performance metrics as a community involvement opportunity for the Schreier Honors College. So you're directly working in the coding and technical side of Google right now. What brought you to the space to come back to the tech from the leadership roles that you've held?
I had a leadership role a couple of jobs back. Really bad fit, didn't like it, burned out. But I'd taken some time off, and then Google recruited me, and they recruited me as a senior manager. But I guess I did well enough in the tech interviews that they gave me my choice. And after confirming the pay was the same for either one, I said, hey, I'd love to go back to tech. And this opportunity to work closer to the exciting field of machine learning, especially at the scale that Google does it, was really unique. So I jumped at that and got a chance to go back and do that again.
And I have to imagine part of that was also the culture at Google that you've just described. Now, for students who are trying to pick maybe between internship opportunities and job opportunities that are availing themselves to the students, how do you start to parse that out in the interview process? Is there any practical tips of what students can look for to help pick up on either green or red flags in that process?
I will give an extreme example, and it's from my personal experience, and I completely missed it. I interviewed at one company, and the people in the interview said, you probably don't want to work here. It's not, they were unhappy, and they said it's not a great fit. For whatever reason, I ignored them, and I took the job, and I absolutely hated it, and I quit a year later as soon as my sign-on and relocation bonuses were up. So there are some pretty obvious red flags you can find. The way I would check if students are looking for it, ask about working conditions, ask about after hours. Don't be afraid to say, hey, what is the culture like? Is there a crunch time? Are people treated well? Are they happy? Just ask the questions. Some people, they'll avoid it if there's really a problem. Some people tell you honestly. And many companies just don't have problems. They really are good places to work, and you'll get enthusiastic, happy responses. And if you get one, that's a great green indicator.
Fantastic. And I'm sure you've shared this advice with your children, because you have a special distinction of being a first-generation Schreier Scholar, because your son is a second-generation scholar.
Mm-hmm.
Can you speak to the experience of raising a second-gen Penn Stater and Schreier Scholar?
So I will admit, I didn't know he was coming to Penn State until the last minute. He had a couple other options, and I didn't know Penn State was going to win out. I was thrilled that it did, but he had a couple other really good options. In terms of that experience now as a parent, I was talking to him last week and seeing the excitement about his research, which is unique to Schreier. A lot of other honors programs, some are almost like special interest dorms. They're not not the extent of Schreier's. See him excited about his research. And you understand, yes, that's not only what's unique about Schreier's, but it's why you go to an R1 university, like top research university that focuses on that. They're unique opportunities to do things that maybe only 4 or 5 other people in the world are working on right now. The coolest thing was hearing him explain it, hearing him enthusiastic, and following about half of it, maybe. And it's exciting to see how that works.
That's great. And I think you just nailed a huge part of the experience for our scholars is there's an excitement to be here. This is a special place. Things aren't always unicorns and rainbows. And I'd be curious if there was I'll call it a transformational mistake that you made at some point, whether as a student, as a professional, and what you learned from that you could share with scholars.
I think there's probably 2 that come to mind. One more personal, one work-related. The work-related one actually goes back to your earlier question about red flags, green flags, and the job I mentioned that I really didn't like. Going into it, I knew there was a lot of organizational problems. I was being hired to rebuild an organization. I've always been really enthusiastic about technology. I thrive on that. I thrive on working people that are excited by that. And none of that was there. And I was really being brought in to do a lot of cutting, do a lot of restructuring that was very difficult in an organization that had a lot of ongoing revenue demands, that hadn't been able to invest in technology for several years, and there wasn't any obvious new funding source to do that investment. Although those are the things that I really thrived on. I should have connected those dots better at the time. And so I wasn't a good fit. I didn't enjoy it. That really burned me out. So that was a difficult thing. There's some degree of self-awareness there, learning what you thrive on, what kind of people you want to work with, what's important to you, and then making sure that the company actually has those things and that you're not you can build a lot of it, you can lead a lot of it, but if you're fighting an established culture, that's really hard. The other one I would stand is you ever get one of those mistakes that you only realize years later that you made a mistake? It informs you. I will say that early 2000s, it was great. I was doing awesome. I had teams I was managing. I was at a startup. I was doing my MBA, family, kids. It was great. I was working like crazy. I was spending long hours. I was up late every night, but it was good. I was enthusiastic, enjoying the people. And I made that comment about 6 or 7 years later. And my wife looks at me and says, "Oh, you mean those 2 years that none of us ever saw you?" I'm like, "Oh, ouch. Okay. I don't think I realized that." And I think, so the mistake there was underestimating what the impact on others were. But I think what the transformational thing there is when you think you've got it all and you think you're getting everything done, it's important to realize who's holding you up and who's carrying you. And that was really one of the things that made me a lot more aware of that my family, my wife particularly was carrying me through a lot of that.
Definitely really powerful things to think about and take with you. If you want to rewind and listen to the last couple minutes, I would recommend you do so. Those are some really, really important thoughts. On the flip side, though, I'd be curious, what would you say is your biggest success?
Oh, it definitely has to be family. It's not professional. My wife and I have raised sons that we are just incredibly proud of. They're great men. They're smart. They're caring. And they're Penn Staters. So we're so glad that the family has all that in common. But that's definitely the biggest success.
Taking the concept of Penn State family to a very literal extreme. I love it. So obviously you and your wife graduated from Penn State a few years ago. I'd be curious on your approach to professional development and how you continue to hone your skills well after your time as both an undergraduate and an MBA student.
I'll say my approach is kind of all over the board. Definitely there's the formal education. I went and got the MBA. I also went back and got a technical certificate in machine learning, and that was from Michigan. Professional development, a lot of it comes from working with good mentors, recognizing things and asking for advice, taking new projects. This is a great way to get a mentor and advice is take on a project that's new and challenging for you and make sure that the person depending on you to get it done has the time to help you get it done, has the time to guide you in getting it done. That's a great way because then they're definitely invested in you. A lot of reading, a lot of personal projects on the side for technical advancement and staying fresh there.
And obviously listening to podcasts. If you're listening to this right now, also a great professional development opportunity. So we'll throw that one in there as a shameless plug for our show here. Are there any professors or friends from your days as a student that you would like to give a shout out to?
Professor John Hannon, he's the associate head of the comp sci department. He joined right around the same time I did to Penn State as an undergrad. He's connected to Schreier's. He's been an honors advisor. He's my son's honors advisor, and he's been a pillar in comp sci for a couple decades now. So definitely shout out to him. Two fellow scholars, they graduated with me as scholars and CS grads, Kevin Hutchison and Mike Smith. They both had great, good friends and great colleagues. They've had good careers building companies. I'll give you their email so you can pull them on the podcast.
Which, speaking of, if a scholar wanted to reach out to you and continue this conversation and pick your brain further, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Several students have found me via LionLink, so that's definitely one way to do it. I'm on LinkedIn as well. That's available. I'm actually working with the EECS alumni group at the moment. We're looking to start an interview resume prep, like industry alumni advisory group for students to get that ready. So I'll probably see a lot more CS students in particular through that program.
That is great to hear. And I appreciate the plug for LionLink, which is the Penn State version of LinkedIn, sponsored by the Penn State Alumni Association. So thanks to them, and thank you for plugging that. As we're wrapping up, is there any final piece of advice that you would want to leave students with?
No. No. Like I said, when you find mentors, when you go and ask for help, you need to know what it is you want to do. Be sure to ask that of your mentors, because they can't really help you and give you advice if they don't know what you want to do and what you're trying to accomplish. So there's really no general advice I can give you other than maybe approach your sources of advice that way.
That's a really good perspective on mentors. And I'd also love your perspective on our traditional final question here on the show. If you were a flavor of Berkey Creamery ice cream, which would you be? And as a scholar alum, most importantly, why would it be that flavor?
Well, I struggled on this one. Bittersweet mint is indisputably the best flavor, and I will argue with anybody who says otherwise. But my wife's favorite is Death by Chocolate, so I'd go with that just to make her happy.
That's very sweet, just like both of those flavors, despite the bitter and bittersweet mint. I agree. Those are both great choices, great rationale. Jim, thank you so much for your time and all of your wonderful insights, not just for CS students, but for all of our Schreier scholars. Really appreciate it. Thank you for coming on the show today.
Thank you. It was nice being here.
Thank you, scholars, for listening and learning with us today. We hope you will take something with you that will contribute to how you shape the world. This show proudly supports the Schreier Honors College Emergency Fund, benefiting scholars experiencing unexpected financial hardship. You can make a difference at raise.psu.edu/Schreier. Please be sure to hit the relevant subscribe, like, or follow button on whichever platform you are engaging with us on today. You can follow the college on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn to stay up to date on news, events, and deadlines. If you have questions about the show or are a scholar alum who'd like to join us as a guest here on Following the Gone, please connect with me at scholaralumni@psu.edu. Until next time, please stay well, and we are...